Very good evening to you all.
Very good evening, Anushka.
Very good evening to you all. And I would like to welcome you all to the 6th book club reading of Ceylon College of Physicians today. Without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Arosh Disanayaka, the President of Ceylon College of Physicians, to introduce you to the event as a regular event. Over to you, sir.
All right, very good evening to you. As must be many others, I'm also struggling with the power cut, and I somehow managed to get to some place where there is a little more light. We seem to be seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. Anyway, so a warm welcome to all of you for this book club reading. This is the 6th in our most sought after book club readings. And the purpose of this is we have placed a lot of emphasis on combining the science with the humanities in the CCP. And as part of that, we started the book club. Book club has members, we talk about books, but in addition to that, we get almost every month someone to talk about a book. This is not a book sort of critique or anything like that, but we are just trying to say how a particular book affected the way that we practice medicine, or maybe even the way that we live. So as part of this program, last month we had Professor Arinanda talking about how his leadership was helped by the 7 habits of highly effective people. And then we have a complete contrast this month with my friend and colleague, Dr. Chathurika Dandeniya, talking about a comedy plus a very humane story book that she will speak to us today. So we do go through many contrasts also in the book club, and then we try to bring in different perspectives here. So a warm welcome to all of you, and many thanks to Chathurika. And of course, Anushka is the lead of the CCV book club sessions. So thank you, Anushka and Madhuvanti for setting this up. Madhuvanti is the other lead for this project. So thank you very much, everybody. And I will hand over to Anushka to continue from here onwards to introduce Chathurika. And then, of course, Chathurika will take us on a wondrous journey with this book. Thank you all for joining this evening. Over to you, Anushka.
Thank you, sir. Actually, it's an honor and great pleasure to introduce Dr. Chathurika Dandeniya to the audience of this 6th CCP book club today. Dr. Chathurika Dandeniya is a very good friend of mine and colleague. Is a senior lecturer in medicine attached to Faculty of Medicine, University of Dandeniya, and consultant in rheumatology and rehabilitation. She's well known for her brilliant academic career, amongst others, actually. She's a great clinician, a dedicated teacher, as well as budding, I would say, mega researcher, knowing her dedication to the research field. And today we are going to see a completely different aspect of her, like as a book reader, actually. So she's going to take us through the book This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay. As Professor Arosh Disanayaka mentioned, is going to be interesting and brilliant talk too. So over to you, Chathurika. And thank you very much for accepting this invitation in very short notice. Thank you, Chathurika, and over to you.
Thank you, Anushka, and Professor Arosh Disanayaka for that very kind introduction and inviting me to do this event in the first place. So I will share the presentation and I will start the talk. I'll introduce the book to you. So it was a very interesting read. And some time ago, I would say about a decade ago, I was a very avid reader. But then a career and 2 children later, like the reading, you would agree that we don't have the time anymore. But this book kind of transformed the way that I looked at medicine, that looked at my career and like everything. And also it changed the way that I dealt with certain emotional situations during my career. So that's why I thought I will introduce this book to you. So this came to me when the going was really tough and I was on the brink of quitting. And I'll tell you the story of how I got my hands on this book. So this is a bestseller. So, and like remained in the best-selling list in the UK, the British IELTS books for 1 year in the end. So like it was that well received and an excellent read. So how I got my hands on this really precious book. So during my overseas training, I was in like the Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, and as like most of you who have undergone NHS training would know, the training in the NHS can sometimes be pretty daunting. So it's not always the walk in the sort of the park. It's not. Sometimes it gets it really gets to you. So this particular incident happened to me about 6 months into my training. And like all of us who have gone for foreign training, we know that the first 3 months of the overseas training, we are kind of in the middle, like in the middle of the deep end of the pool, expected to know how to swim when we don't. So we are getting used to an entire new healthcare system, which is like completely foreign. On paper writing, and we are like suddenly thrown in the middle of an electronic record keeping. And so everything is foreign. The people are new, the healthcare system is new, everything is new. So on top of all these stresses, so I'm a rheumatologist by profession. So my training was a pure rheumatology post, which meant most of my work was outpatient. 95% of my work was outpatient. So compared to the inpatient work of the NHS, how the outpatient work would differ, I would say, is that you deal with much more patient complaints. The reason being, we deal with patients who are in pain. Rheumatologists, we deal with patients who are in pain and who have been in pain for 6 months waiting for an appointment with the rheumatologist. So they are disgruntled, extremely disgruntled group of people. So you expect complaints. However, this was something new to me. So like in Sri Lanka, like we don't get complained about by people, usually by our patients, at least not in a sort of a formal going to the SLMC sort of way. So, but there I learned it the hard way. For a doctor working in the outpatients per year, the minimum number of complaints, the average number of complaints per year is 6 per year. So this is a big number. But my first complaint came when I was like in my 6th month of training, and it completely tore me apart. So I just sat down in front of my computer one morning, just opened my email, and there it was, the dreaded sort of the most unwelcome complaint from the PALS. Those who worked in the UK know what PALS is. It's the Patient Advice and Liaison Service. Definitely not PALS to doctors, but PALS to patients. So the complaints usually come from the patients for whom we go the extra mile for. That's what I have realized over the 2 years. So this was one particular patient that I had taken, like I had spent about 30 minutes on a 15-minute appointment, and I have gone way beyond like what I was supposed to do. And I thought, at least I thought I had gone way beyond and I did everything possible. But turned around and the patient made a big complaint saying that I was insensitive, this and that and the other. And I just read it. I sat down and I cried. So then like my room was very near to the room of the secretaries, and my secretary was walking on the corridor, and she came in and asked, why, Chatu, what's happened? And then when I told her, she said, okay, don't worry, these things happen. And then she was a pillar of support, and like so were the other colleagues, the senior colleagues in the department. And I pulled through. And 3 days later, she came to my office with this book in her hand and said, I tried to find this book everywhere in Cambridge. I couldn't. Because it's sold out. So I asked my husband, who works in London, to go to a bookshop where he can find this, and you should read this. So she handed over the book. So that is how I came across this book. So to tell a little bit about the author, this is the author. His name is Adam Kay. So he's a Jewish from an extremely conservative family of doctors. And he's the most unorthodox person in that family. So sort of the black sheep of the family. So he gave up medicine in the middle. He's gay and he's a comedian. So that's enough for the rest of the family to shun him for life. So this is him. So he used to be an NHS doctor. He was almost at the level of completion of his training when he suddenly decided, okay, this is it. I'm going to leave. So this story is about how all that came about. So the narrative of the book starts with an introduction as to like how this book came into being. It's written in first person. He's talking about his experiences, and these are in the form of diary entries. So he describes this as like coming from the reflection section of his portfolio. I don't really know whether this is actually from the portfolio, because I don't think anybody puts down this sensitive information or like this much of personal information in the portfolio, which kind of is your training log. But in the beginning, he says that he has altered names of patients, colleagues, and hospital trusts for very obvious reasons. And very interestingly, most names that he has used in place of the real names are from Harry Potter characters. For example, Harry, Ernie, Ron, and Scurvy, and all that. The center point of this whole thing is the NHS and the battle the NHS has been having with the politicians through the years. So it's not a very like funny battle. It's not at all. So like reading this book conjured mixed emotions in me. It seems a very light read. So written by a now professional comedian, you expect comedy, drama throughout the book. Yes, it is. It's seemingly light read. Hilarious. You can just sit down and laugh until tears come out. But it's also extremely heartbreaking. There are like some diary entries which I like read, and because I can relate to that, like there were tears in my eyes this time, not out of like mirth. And it's also poignant in its own way. And most importantly, it talks about a truth that is very hardly ever acknowledged. We all know this truth, but maybe we are too busy, we don't have time. Or more importantly, I would say, we all know it, but acknowledge it, and then what is it going to change? So for me, all of these reasons, this is a truth that is hardly acknowledged. Introduction part, he starts off with this. In 2010, after 6 years of training and a further 6 years on the boards, I resigned from my job as a junior doctor. Last year, the GMC wrote to me to say they were taking my name off the medical registers. So this is the exact starting sentence of the book. So it kind of gives away the ending. So despite all the funny anecdotes and everything, we know that he's going to give up the job one day. But he goes on to say, okay, I have given you a spoiler, but still, you watched Titanic knowing that the ship is going to sink. So you knew the end, but you still watched it. So there you go. So as I said, he says that this is from the reflective practice section of his portfolio. And interestingly, he says, like in the same introduction, 3 pages, that there were points where I wouldn't have flinched if an entry-red swam to Iceland for antenatal clinic or had to eat a helicopter today. Because at the time that he was in this training, this again, I tell you, try to relate to this. At the time that we were in the training as a junior doctor, house officer, registrar, senior registrar, whatever, as a junior doctor, we always thought, okay, this is part of the job. So we are supposed to do this. We never questioned, okay, is this within our capacity? So we just took it in the stride and just moved on. But he says the same. So at that time, he thought, it's all in the job, so I have to do it. But now looking back, going through his diary entries, he says, I now finally realize how unreasonable the level of demands that were put on me. And this is where it's all lead into. So this is what this sentence explains. And the main reason why he wrote this book was that at the time, so this book was published in 2017. Those who may, like some of you may remember that around 2016, there was a huge fight between the politicians and the junior doctors. So the junior doctors here means everybody, all the doctors who are not consultants. So like starting from house officers all the way up to the senior registrars. Currently, the terminology is different. You start as FY1 and up to the ST7. So all these are junior doctors. So this particular battle, unfortunately, the junior doctors lost and the politicians won. And he says that he was extremely angry because of the public outcry that was triggered by the politicians. I don't think it's any different in Sri Lanka. Even here, like we saw during the fuel crisis, how the people looked at us. They have no inkling about the job that we do. So this is exactly what happened in the UK in 2016. So he said, I couldn't help but feel doctors were struggling to get their side of the story across, probably because they were at the ward at work the whole time. They didn't have time to bother or the energy. So this is sort of his the reasoning behind why he came out with this book. So target audience, again, I would say this is in my opinion. Despite being the diary of a doctor, this book is aimed at medical as well as non-medical audiences alike. Because like Mr. K gives like beautiful sort of footnotes in most of the pages, explaining the medical terms, things that may sound like very simple to us. For non-medical audiences, they may be very confusing. So he explains all the technical terms given at the end of as a footnote. So this explains that unlike being a junior doctor, I won't just drop you in the deep end and expect you to know exactly what you're doing. Isn't this what we were doing as a junior doctor? So in my opinion, I think this is a must for all doctors, all patients, non-medical spouses of all doctors to understand what sort of a life doctors lead, and parents of all doctors, medical students, and prospective medical students who are still in schools. So which literally means the whole population. I would say anybody who is like keen on reading should read this book. So he gives the narrative in stages of his training. So the first, like just after the introduction, he starts as the first chapter being house officer. So like that, this goes as like house officer, registrar, house officer, senior house officer, post 1, post 2, post 3, then registrar, and then senior registrar. So how this is how the book progresses. And also, like before I move on further, I also like want to bring up one point. So those who, again, those who have experience in the NHS working there, like have, I would say, two different sorts of experiences about the British colleagues, about the NHS colleagues. Because now when I went for my training, that was in 2019, what I saw was like, I found it a bit difficult to adapt to that system in the beginning because like my shift was 9 to 5. But being trained in the system here, I always went to work by 8. And I saw my like supervisor, my clinical lead coming to work by about 8:45. And then they see me seated at the desk going through the patient notes. And they're like, what are you doing here? You are not being paid for an extra hour. So why are you here? So I didn't think that like that strange behavior to come in 1 hour earlier or to leave 3 hours later. So again, my colleagues there, like the shift ends at 5. So you don't see them in the office by 5:05. But like to me, that was a bit difficult. For one thing, obviously I was adapting there. So like I could not manage my time as efficiently as them. And still, like if I was on call during my like afternoon, the shift ends at 5. If I got a call at 4:55, I would still attend to that. I would not really hand it over to the next person coming. And then it took me a while to realize the others were not doing that. So like if the shift ends at 5, they leave at 5. So this may be completely different from the experience of those who went for like have their work experience in the NHS before that, maybe like early 2000s, 2010s. So at the end of this narrative, you will understand why. So NHS doctors were not different to us at one point. They all they went out of their way. They like went beyond the call of their duty to do their work, but they changed. So what made that change? We'll see. So it starts off extremely hilarious, and it's a bitter truth because it questions, why did you choose to do medicine? So he starts off by saying, the decision to work in medicine is basically a version of the email you get in early October, asking you to choose your many options for the work Christmas party. No doubt you'll choose the chicken to be on the safe side. Yeah, like you get the email in October, whereas you have the Christmas party in December. And he goes on to say, okay, within this like 2 months, so many things can change. You may suddenly decide to become a vegetarian, but you have already chosen chicken. So there, though, you have an option because maybe your colleague will swap the dinner with you because you have suddenly gone vegetarian. But the decision to work in medicine, once made, it's not as if that you can change it, because every doctor makes their career choice age 16, 2 years before they are legally allowed to take a photo of their own genitals. I have to warn you, you will come across a lot of swear words, obscenities in this, but you will get through that. So this is like, isn't this true? Even in Sri Lanka. So we think that they are different. Like there are differences in the way that the students enroll in medical schools in the UK, but not vastly different. Didn't we make the career choice age 16? Why did we like choose to do biology at the end of our O-levels? Okay, maybe 17, not really 16, but I would say most of us knew that we were going to get into medicine, or rather we were aiming at medicine. But why? Did we really know what we were getting into? And also in the UK, the system there works as like your A-level results are just 30% of all that you require to get into med school. That's because like medical faculties are so oversubscribed. So as a result, they need to hold a grueling interview to choose who is going to be the best candidate. So he goes on to criticize this very sarcastically but extremely true comments about this admission policy. But as I said, it's not just applicable there. So, for example, see this comment. They don't even check whether you are okay with the sight of blood. Instead, they fixate on extracurricular activities. Okay, here, given that we don't have interviews, we don't see what sort of extracurricular activities they do. However, do we check whether the students are okay with the sight of blood? Do the students think about that, whether they are okay with the sight of blood before they decide that they are going to get into biology to become a doctor one day? Not really. So from like at a glance, you would recognize this page as coming from Wikipedia. So this is to laugh at the fact that the universities pay so much attention in the UK about the extracurricular activities. So it says this particular person about whom this Wikipedia entry is about was an accomplished rugby player in youth leagues, and then he was a distance runner, and his final year at school, he served as vice captain of the athletics team. So the model student. So he was accepted to a certain medical school there. But if you look at who this is all about, this is about Dr. Harold Shipman. I don't know whether you all are aware about who Dr. Shipman was. He was, because he's passed away now. He's the most notorious serial killer in the history of Britain. And he's the only doctor who was ever found guilty of killing his patients. The victim number is estimated to be about 255, the number of people he killed. So obviously there is something wrong with this sort of admission policy, something going wrong somewhere. So this is what this exact example is cited in this book, and he's laughing at it. I'm going through the house officer here. He identifies with the life of the house officer, fresh in the board. I hope all of you can remember your house officer here. Nobody can ever forget, I would say. It was like what we were learning all through the med school was just the tip of the iceberg. Even with all the advances in the teaching, learning and everything, those who are in the universities would know, there is still a huge gap between medical school training and the job of a house officer. So he goes on to say, it came quite the blow to discover that I'd spent a quarter of my life at medical school, and it hadn't remotely prepared me for the Jekyll and Hyde existence of a house officer. Isn't this the same for us as well? Or rather, wasn't this the same for us? At least it definitely was for me. And I can still remember thinking, what the hell was I doing for 6 years in med school, when I felt as if I learned all I had to learn during that 1 year of an intern. So he goes on to say, during the time, house officers are like a glorified personal assistant who goes on typing, just filling forms, running here and there, running errands, everything except for cleaning toilets. But during night shift, suddenly everybody thinks that you can sail the ship alone. and it's a ship that's enormous and on fire, and then no one has really taught you how to sail, and you are the captain of the ship. It's sink or swim, so you kind of get used to it after a while. But the first few weeks, at one point he goes on to say, it's a miracle that not many really try to commit suicide, because he relates the story of one house officer who took an overdose of antidepressants. And the fact that everybody is amazed, why doesn't this happen more often than it really happens? Through all this, there are so many funny stories. And while reading, you can all live through your own intention. So many firsts, hilarious mistakes, and the dots. And also the PTSD given by the bleep. Given that we don't use bleep still in Sri Lanka here, I would say for me, the counterpart was the alarm tone and the ringtone of the phone that I used during my internship. I was so traumatized that I changed my phone, period, just after the internship. And I never wanted to listen to that alarm tone or the ringtone ever again. But also, despite, in addition to all these funny stories, death in the board and the first life you actually saved. And these landmarks that have marked us for life. The first death that I ever saw in the ward was not when I was a house officer, but when I was in just after my second MBBS, so in between the second and the third years, during the first clinical appointment. I still remember the trauma of it. A patient who was alive 1 second, and then 30 minutes later, he's pronounced dead. And I still remember, as a group, we were huddled together in the students' room in Kagol Teaching Hospital, and we were just crying, like a bunch of babies, because it's completely you are not prepared for it. Go through it, even though you know that you are going to get into the sort of life and death situations. That's all on the books. You haven't really been prepared for that. So the first that Adam had seen in the ward was even worse. So the death that I saw was from heart failure from an acute MI, but this was much more horrific. He saw a patient exsanguinating an adult male, death by exsanguination due to esophageal varices. And the first life to be saved came after 5 months in the wards. And he explains that we think that we are there saving lives every day, but it's more the team effort, everybody doing this thing, that thing, and the other, and it doesn't really you don't really feel that you have saved a life. But suddenly there's this 68-year-old long stay patient who was anyway a terminal patient, and he started acutely desaturating, and he's working on autopilot mode, suddenly doing this, that, and the other without really thinking, and suddenly the patient is back to life. And he's extremely happy about himself when his registrar, who is nicknamed as Hugo, says, well, you bought him another couple of weeks on Earth. So that's the sort of the appreciation that he gets. And he mentioned so much about the lack of rest. And he says that I told a patient that his MRI wouldn't be until next week, and he threatened to break both of my legs. My first thought was, well, it'll be a couple of weeks of work. And I was this close to offering to find him a baseball bat. Yeah, I can relate to that, because I can remember there was one house officer who got one of my co-house officers who got a contagious sort of a viral disease, nothing much, it's mumps. And everybody was wishing, will we get mumps as well, so that we will have some time off. But unfortunately, he was the only one to come down with mumps. There you go. But this happens to all of us, because it's that restless. That 1 year is almost like slave driving. And December of 2004. This is extremely interesting, because again, those who have worked in the NHS would know that when we go there, but remember after 2004, obviously, all junior doctors are requested to sign a document to opt out of the European Working Time Directive. So I was also given this form, no explanation was given, and my HR contact, she just said, okay, you need to sign this. And I asked, what is it? And she said, if you don't sign it, basically you will not be able to work here. obviously I wanted my like extremely hard done job. So I said, okay, I'll sign it. And I just signed it. And after signing on, I went through to find out what the hell did I sign. And it says 11 hours continuous rest in every 24-hour period, minimum 20-minute break when shift exceeds 6 hours, minimum 24-hour rest in every 7 days, or minimum 48-hour rest in every 14 days, minimum of 4 weeks of paid annual leave, and maximum 8 hours work in 24 hours if categorized as a night work. So these are sort of the minimum requirements. So the European Working Time Directive, of which NHS is part. So NHS has signed saying, okay, we also accept this Working Time Directive. But if they really go according to the Working Time Directive, they will have to close down most of the trusts, because a junior doctor's job does not entail any of this. So instead what they do is they give us a form saying, I am opting out of this, but it's not even a choice. It's like you opt out and you work, or you choose not to opt out and you don't have the job. So it's not really a choice. And as I said, this book is not just applicable in the UK. So thinking about our work lives now, do we have any of this? The working time directives were like brought into place for a reason, because like the committee who came out with this, their argument was, if you don't like lay down the working hours and the rests and the breaks like this, there is higher likelihood that there is a chance of human error, more likely that you will make errors of judgment during work. And we work jobs with regard to patients' lives. So it's not easy. So that's why it's there. But the very group who is supposed to be like taking this very seriously and doing this are being asked to opt out of this by the management. All through this, somehow or other, he completed 1 year as a house officer and goes on to become a senior house officer in the first post. So this is where in the UK system again, where all the junior doctors are supposed to make a career choice, because like you choose as the senior house officer post, that's the prospective specialty in which you are going to work in one day. So it's like making a career choice. So like whether you are going to become a surgeon, whether you want to become a neurosurgeon, orthopedic, or whether you are going to be an internist. So this is when you decide. Just after like 1 year of internship. So it's not easy. And it is also the first major career decision since the decision to pursue medicine age 16, which was not a very well-informed decision. And still you feel as ill-prepared as can be. Are we any different? After an internship of 12 months, we also have something called the post-internship. And then suddenly we, like, if we are going to, so that is the difference between the NHS and us, because in the NHS, it's mandatory, like you don't have a choice, you just like go along the path. But here, we have to decide, but still, do we decide with all the information in place? So he goes through the hilarious descriptions of different specialties, and finally he explains how he ended up with gyn and obs, partly through choice, but partly through exclusion. And I would say it describes my career choice in medicine to the dot. When I was going to decide whether I wanted to do medicine or not, my first thought was, maybe not. After like 6 months in medicine and 6 months in surgery, I thought, okay, I'm never going to do medicine. And then I wanted to experiment and see. And I chose anesthesia as the post-intern appointment. And at the end of the 6 months training, I decided, okay, maybe for 2 years, but not for a lifetime. It's not for me. Then I had to make the choice. Okay, I wanted to do a clinical subject, which ticked off a lot of the available options at the time. And it can't be anything in surgery because I wanted a family. So tick off surgery and medicine, surgery and gynae obs. It definitely can't be anything to do with children because I'm horrible with dealing with deaths of children. Cut that off, and I ended up with medicine. So wasn't really an active choice, but rather a passive choice. It's a separate matter that I have no regrets whatsoever now. But did I really make my decision in the correct way? Don't think so. So he like describes certain subspecialties like that he was thinking about in extremely hilarious ways. Yeah, but he ended up doing gyn and obs. And this extremely funny story about shift on the 25th of December, which is like the most important, like the public holiday, because in the UK, you have only 6 public holidays per year. So the 6 public holidays, at the beginning of the working year, they have decided, okay, I want this holiday off and I want this one off. So that was my experience. And most of the time during my 2 years there, almost all the important holidays I ended up working, because I was a Buddhist, so I didn't really want the Christmas off. Again, for the same reason, I didn't want the Easter off. So like the only good thing there was, like, if you worked on Christmas, they tended to give you the rest of the bank holidays off. So I kind of voluntarily did the Easter as well. But there at that time, he describes a pecking order of getting leave on this all important holiday of December 25th. And the pecking order starts with the person who is making the rota, who is obviously excluded. And then next goes those who have children, and so on and so forth. And he goes on to say, being childless, being unmarried, he was usually the obvious pick to cover the Christmas shift. Does this sound familiar? New Year holidays in April? I would think so. And consequences of the NHS battle on cost-cutting. So this is a never-ending battle. Even until now, it's an ongoing battle, because similar to Sri Lanka, like we have built our health system more or less based on the NHS, which means the NHS is a free healthcare system. So there is always the battle of about, okay, the taxpayers' money, and like you need to cut the costs and everything. So through hilarious stories, decisions made by managers who are mostly not doctors. So this is something the doctors are struggling with. Your work hours are designated by managers. Like you are basically somebody on a work line in a factory. You are not human. You are a robot on a factory working line. And the gap between management decisions and actual work conditions, which is completely unabridged. So these are real practical problems. So one hilarious incident is about a dictaphone incident. So again, those who have worked at least once in the outpatient clinics there would know that at the end of the outpatient clinics, it's not simple like here, where you scribble something down on the clinic book and then that's it. There, you have to write a detailed letter at the end of the clinic visit with the patient to go to the primary care doctor, the GP, and you have to copy to the patient. So this letter writing is a never-ending admin business. So he has been trying to sign off a stack of letters written to the GP. So at this time, the NHS has laid off so many long-serving, hard-working secretaries just to save up on money. So at this time, what was happening was the doctors who were in the clinics, they were dictating the letters, and this will be the voice recording will be sent overseas to sort of low labor cost countries, where there would be people who have been trained on this to listen to the letter and transcribe that. So this is what happened at the time. So this letter had been transcribed like that by somebody overseas, and he was just going through the letter, and it says, "Dear doctor, I saw XA, which is short for the patient, in clinic with her husband Sam, Esther Sugar, and their 2 children." And he says, I was trying to think, who is this Esther Sugar and who is this Sam? So who really are the 2 parents of the 2 children? Because there are 3 parents according to this: XA, the husband Sam, and Esther Sugar. And luckily enough, he had the sound recording. So he had gone through the recording only to see. He had said, I saw XA in clinic with her husband Sam, within brackets, S for sugar. He wanted to say Sam is like S for sugar. And it came back as Esther Sugar. So he goes on to say the quality of the transcriptions would suggest the back end of the system involves 2 tin cans, a length of string, and a lemur who's been trained to type. I wouldn't say anything better than this. So the senior house officer port 2. By this time, he has now gone through the training for 2 years. So he's much more confident, energetic, and enthusiastic. And he goes on to say that he thinks he made the right choice by going into GNNOP. And for the second post, he moved into a hospital that is known to be an old-fashioned hospital among the trainees, which he says, when translated from medical English into real English, means you are on your own. That's what is meant by old-fashioned. It's a hospital where it's like see one, do one, and teach one. If you see it once, you are supposed to do it the next time and teach it the third time. And he says, if it is see one and do one, that is an improvement, because most of the time it's just do one. Just like the first ultrasound clinic that he did, when he had not even seen an ultrasound machine before, like being used in the clinic, he was supposed to run a list of 25 patients in clinic. And the tone here is more lighthearted and full of humor, because now he's no longer like the fish out of water. He has spent 2 years in the wards. He knows what's happening, so it's very lighthearted and extremely funny. And he goes on to say about his first sick day off, which was in September 2006, so more than 2 years after he started his training. And the response from an extremely angry registrar when he calls in to say that he'll be off sick is to call around and find a replacement to cover his shift. And he wonders whether it will be the same protocol at Google or GlaxoSmithKline or even Ginsters, like if you call in sick. And he says, is there a single other workplace where you'd conceivably be asked to arrange your own sickness cover? The North Korean army, maybe? Yeah, that's how bad it is. So, through all that, so I wouldn't really summarize it because I just want to share the experience of reading this book. So throughout the rest of the part, until up until the registrar training post, there are many recurring themes. They are about poor salaries, the appalling treatment of trainees by their supervisors, lack of any system to reward hard work or to punish bad work, and then lack of social life to the trainees. So all these come in as recurring themes through many anecdotes. About the salary. This is, I would say, something we all have experienced in. Although, compared to our salary here, the salary there is definitely much better. And also, even here, are we being paid enough to the level of work that we do, to the level of experience that we have? Up for debate. Even in the UK, there are huge taxes with the pittance of a take-home salary. And he says, in the middle of one long sentence, that you take home less money per week than a train driver for 1,000 times more work. And he says that doctors tend not to complain about the money though. Same as here. It's not a profession you go in to satisfy the dollar signs behind your eyes, whatever the occasional dead-mouth politician may say. Besides, even if you're unhappy with your salary, there's so little you can do about it. Or I would say there's no time for you to worry about it. There was this running joke when when we were all in the same locum bank. So we all obviously didn't have enough money to run a whole family, even with a paid job. So we took on the odd locums. So those who were in the locum bank, there was this running joke saying, it's okay to do locums, collect the salary, but never look at the salary slip. Because if you look at the salary slip, you would feel like going to the ASDA and stacking boxes rather than going to the A&E covering a shift. So not worth it. And about the lack of appreciation of training. Because isn't this another theme that is familiar? We all do, I would say, go the extra mile and they do work without a single complaint. And how many times have we really been appreciated for what we did? Here, there, wherever. But more like the moment that you make a mistake, that is where your knuckles get dropped. So when one of them said thank you, so he says that patients tend to get into. When one of them said thank you, you knew they meant it. So I would say even for us, even now, this is sort of the only thank you that we get for all that we do. A thank you, a sincere thank you coming from a patient just keeps you going. And about the hilarious incidents about trainee social life and family life, or I would say the lack of one thereof. So there are so many anecdotes about that. So throughout the story, he until his senior registrar, he talks about H, who is his live-in partner at the time of his training. He doesn't give any more details about the partner. Or more or less, it is the partner who was living alone because Adam was forever in the hospital. So like about how many Christmases they missed, how many holidays cancelled last minute and everything. And many a party thrown by friends and family that were missed the last minute without any of them being the least understanding. The usual thing being, we told you 2 months before, which is like useless because you don't have your rota 2 months before. And enough money saved for a deposit for a flat by the third year, despite the low pay. Yeah, like he keeps on complaining about a low salary, but by his third year of training, he has enough money saved as a deposit. For obvious reasons, because there is nothing better to spend it on except for coffee and fuel, which are like not like crazy expensive because you don't go out. And also a very sensitive story about one colleague having to sit out his son's emergency surgery because he had to perform a non-emergency operation on a patient when there was nobody who could cover up for him the last minute. And obviously the lack of incentive for performance in any way. So this goes on like a hilarious comparison of studying for postgraduate qualification, which is like MRCOG Part 1 for him. So because they are like for the MRCP is something that you need to, MRCP or the MRCS or whatever that you choose to do, it's part of like your training. So during the training years, you are supposed to like finish this diploma. So he has finished, like by this time he has finished the MRCOG Part 1 and he has finally got the results to say he has passed. And he's throwing a party with his best friend Ron, who has equally like just completed a postgraduate degree in accountancy. And they like over a beer in a pub, they like share their experience with the exam, and it's hilarious. So study hours of Adam was like to squeeze in as much revision as possible while working. And he says as much as the bloodshot eyes would allow. Whereas for Ron, the employers had cut down hours to allow study time. Study leave for Adam was 1 week, which was cancelled last minute without discussion due to staffing issues. So he was working all the like 6 days leading to his exam on the 7th day. And for Ron, it was 1 month of paid leave to prepare for the exam. Exam fees and material, obviously for those who are in the NHS, self-funded, for which he spent £1,300 according to him, which was 2/3 of his take-home monthly pay. And for Ron, all expenses paid for the exam as well as the study material. And the reward for passing, for Adam, it's eligibility to enter the Part 2 of the same exam. And for Ron, it's immediate pay rise and a promotion. And the final outcome, he just says, he had pinched the pencil during the exam, which is provided by the RCOG. So for Ron, it is happiness and satisfaction. So Ron points out in the end that you have spent £1,300 on a pencil. So this entry on the 3rd of June 2008, I thought I would like just mention this because this is something that I also relate to at a personal level. So this is an extremely heart-wrenching story about a doctor couple who found their first baby had died in utero at 32 weeks. And the author follows the story up until the delivery. So it happens by accident because he's the one who does the ultrasound in the clinic and finds that the baby has died in utero. And 2 weeks later, they get admitted for an 1 week later, they get admitted for an induced labor. And he's on the labor ward duty at on that same day. Because he says that it's a terrible cruelty that if a baby dies in utero, the safest place to deliver is on labor ward, surrounded by dozens of mothers and babies. I continually question this practice, but nobody is able to give me a satisfactory answer. I have visited friends, relatives for whom the same thing has happened. And with even without the pregnancy hormones in place, how can a person listen to other babies crying and other mothers cooing their babies when your own baby has died and you have given birth to the dead baby? It's like these are empathic questions that I think we should ask ourselves. Is it really fair? Maybe you can have a closed-off place in the labor room just for the delivery. So in Peradeniya, at least we have one such place, but it's not soundproof. You can hear the babies crying on the other side. At least you can't see them. But once the baby is delivered, you come back to the postnatal ward where every mother is with a baby. So as a senior registrar, this brings us to the final part of the story. So here the author beautifully relates to the escalating stress levels the job entails, because weren't we all the same? When we were HOs, we envied our registrars who seemed to have a better, easier job. When we were registrars, we envied our senior registrars who seemed to have an easier job. And similarly, when we were senior registrars, we envied our consultants to the maximum, thinking they had the easier job. But the work might cut down, might or might not, depending on what type of juniors you have. But the level of responsibility definitely goes up. So he relates very well into that. And hilariously, he's noted to have high blood pressure when checked just after a night shift. So he goes on assuring the nurse who took his blood pressure that he's just after a night shift, but she wouldn't take a no. So she books him into the GP. And again, he goes just after a night shift because that is the only time that you have off. And his blood pressure is again high. And finally, he has to undergo ambulatory blood pressure monitoring that he chooses to do on an antenatal clinic day for practical reasons, because theatre labor ward, he would have to change in and out of scrubs. And he has to sit down and prescribe antihypertensives to patients with much lower blood pressures than his own. The funny side of this is not lost on patients, and throughout the day, he gets so many funny comments, anecdotes from his patients. But one remark from a patient in this is that it's funny, you don't think of doctors getting ill. Adam analyzes this and says, patients don't actually think of doctors as being human in the first place. For them, doctors are the infallible god. Like they cannot become ill, they cannot suffer. That's why they bite your head off for the slightest of things. That's why they think that you can be the punching bag for everything that goes wrong. Because for them, you are not human. And about my favorite part, about the pals. As I said, there are pals to patients, definitely not doctors. So he tells the story about this one grandson who has accompanied his very sweet grandmother to a surgery. And the grandmother is as sweet as can be, but this grandson is treating the medical staff like crap. Because he's under the impression that the more he treats the medical staff like crap, the more convinced they will be of his importance, and thus the better treatment that the patient will receive. And unfortunately, this is a commonly held belief, and he's absolutely right. Because this sort of patients are the ones who are going to go to PAPS and make a complaint. And the whole investigative procedure and the letter writing, and finally, because whatever said and done, in the end, most of the time, the patient is correct. And no matter how correct you are or your team is, you end up writing a letter of apology to the patient. Most of the time, that is what happens. So to avoid all that crap, most of the time what happens is when patients start behaving bullishly like this, you just concede. You just let them have their way and you keep on apologizing. Say sorry, because that's easier. Unfortunately, as gut-wrenching as it sounds, that is how it happens. I have seen this day in and day out. So his last diary entry is made on Sunday, the 5th December, 2010. It's a devastating story, I had to warn you. So after all the lighthearted humor and all the laughing, this has no warning. It comes without a warning. Suddenly, there's the story of an emergency cesarean section ending up with fetal death, a massive postpartum hemorrhage, and despite everything and calling 2 consultants in, and them trying everything that is possible, after a 12-pint blood transfusion, the patient needs an emergency hysterectomy. And the sad part is that there is a newly married young female in her first pregnancy. So she loses a baby, she loses a uterus without any hope for the future, and she barely makes it out alive. So she's sent to the ICU, and that's it. It's like a train wreck. There is no concern of negligence or malpractice. At least that is what everybody keeps on telling him. Anybody else would have done the same, because he does everything in his power, because this all happens due to an previously undiagnosed placenta previa. The antenatal scans had no inkling of it. They just put the lower segments uterine section, and there's gushing out blood. So there's nothing that would have been done to prevent that, except for maybe a better scan, which was not his job anyway. But following this incident, he was never the same again. So he did not give up immediately. We'll come to that, but he's never the same. For the help and assistance provided by employers, surprisingly, zilch. He's back at work the very next day. I don't know whether you know this, but like when there's a train accident, if a train driver hits a person walking on the rail, and obviously the person is going to die, they are given time off, and they are offered counseling, and they get everything for their benefit, because like this is something that is very hard to bend your head around. But do we get the same? I don't think so. No matter like how much this is close, like how close this is to our heart, and no matter how much we are traumatized by that incident, the amount of like the help and the backup that we get from the system, be it here, be it there, be it in Australia, I don't think we get any. It was the literal hair that broke the camel's back. So he left the NHS only a few months later. He completed his like the first year as senior registrar. He never took up the second year. So he goes on to write about the aftermath. He had tried, like he thought about practicing as a doctor in a different field. So he looked at other career options, going into GP practice, going into some other areas in medicine. But that would entail going back to being a junior doctor, that is like SHO in year one in the new specialty, and working from that point onwards. After 6 years of training in gyne and obs as a specialty, it's something that you can't even think about. Can you think about being a senior registrar and then going back and doing the entrance exam for another specialty and doing from the beginning? It's not possible. So he thought about taking time off, and finally, when nothing worked, he decided that he's going to lay down his stethoscope and walk away. Unfortunately, this was a decision that was not understood by the closest of family or friends. And it didn't really help that he could not open up and speak about what led to this. Not just the final incident, but everything which led to this. Because how often do we talk about the horrors that go on at workplace? If your spouse is a doctor, they might understand. If they're not, you don't really want to bring the horrors of work to home and then really while at home for the limited few hours that you spend there. And revisiting the real reason for writing this book, he says, you never completely stop being a doctor. Even after you give up your profession, you never completely stop. And he goes on to say about the anguish he felt on behalf of his fellow comrades when the politicians waged war against the junior doctors in 2016. And unfortunately, as I said, they won by depicting the doctors as money-grubbing, greedy idiots to the general public. Like when I asked some of my very close colleagues about this working hour practice, like why 9 to 5 is exactly 9 to 5, not 5 minutes more, not 5 minutes less. But one of my very close friends, she told me, it will never leave my mind. Like what she said is, you can go the extra mile and do it, but then who gives a shit? Not really anybody, because management dictates how you should work. And if you're going to say, I'm overworked, their response is, it's your fault. You're not managing your time properly. So it's on you. It's like that. So this is the change that happened after 2016. So those who went for overseas training before that and after that would now relate to the change that you see in the workers, because they're extremely disheartened. They are of the opinion, why bother? If we work and work and work ourselves to death and still the NHS doesn't care, and the moment something goes wrong, they pick on you saying, it's because you were burnt out. You should have taken leave. So why bother? So he ends by saying, but promise me this, next time the government takes the pickaxe to the NHS, don't just accept what the politicians try to feed you. Think about the toll the job takes on every healthcare professional at home and at work. Remember, they do an absolutely impossible job to the very best of their abilities. Your time in hospital may well hurt them a lot more than it hurt you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chathurika. Thank you very much for that excellent talk. Actually, I hope we all can relate some of the incidents throughout our career to the Adam's case stories as well. So thank you again for the excellent talk, and the forum is open for discussion now. Is there anyone who would like to comment or question anything?
Thank you, Chathurika. This is Arosha Disanak. I don't know whether you can hear me.
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Right. Chathurika, thank you for a brilliant talk on this. This is exactly, I think, what we had when we started this process. Where we try to talk about books which we relate to and which actually influence the way I think. And then you've spoken to us about how this helped you overcome one of the probably darkest moments of your professional career. When a patient complaint is, it's something which shatters us, especially when we believe that we are generally good doctors. So a brilliant presentation. I'm very grateful to you for enlightening this. And I think I myself, what do I take from your talk? So this goes another step. You've taken something from the book, and I'm trying to see what I can take from your book. And I'm just wondering. I'm just wondering whether I am one of those nasty consultants who never say thank you to the juniors, but who probably finds only shortcomings. So that's the kind of reflection that I will do on my own work. I will try to make sure that I appreciate my juniors' work in time to come, fully appreciating the difficulties they have. Because what happens is, after some time, we just look for perfection. And whenever people are not perfect, we find fault with them, quite forgetting that we've been there ourselves. So that's what I'm going to take away from your book. And I'll make sure that I thank my junior staff for the good that they do and the occasional mistakes they do. Well, I'll accept that in my stride. Thank you, Chathurika.
Thank you very much, sir.
Anushka has been my registrar, so Anushka might...
Actually, sir, yeah.
I'm sorry,
I won't agree with you in that fact, sir. Yeah, you're being appreciating a lot. I would like to say that we have been appreciating a lot, actually. I think most of the audience is in this book club is the consultants. I think that's a very good point. I also thought that we need to appreciate a lot of people's work. It doesn't matter whether it is a junior doctor or a nursing staff or who it is, but for the good work they are doing, we need to appreciate that. Pointing out faults of them mostly. Yes. Is there anyone who...
Yeah, just another point, Anushka. At some stage, I was seriously thinking about setting up a society for prevention of cruelty to registrars.
Yes. That's very good thing, sir. Yes. Maybe I think it should be cruelty to registrars and house officers, both.
At least cruelty to junior doctors. Okay. Okay.
Okay. In the absence of five, I think it's greatly participated the discussion today, Chathurika. I would like to thank you very much, actually, for accepting this invitation in very short notice. Actually, I talked to you about 2 weeks or just 10 days ago. So, and you never said no to me or to whoever. Thank you very much, Chathurika. And
thank you, Anushka, for inviting.
I think this will be accepted, greatly viewed in the YouTube channels as well for the people who couldn't join us today live. And there are several comments as well. You can see in the chat box. And in the absence of any other comments, we'd like to finish off for the day. And I would like to wish all you very good night, and hopefully we'll meet you again in another interesting session like this, in most probably after 2 months, because next month is going to be our annual academic sessions. Thank you very much all for joining us, and have a great night.